This is the MO Sessions podcast, where we talk about magic ways to become a better magician to be good to your magic. I'm your host, Benny Slade, and I couldn't be any more thrilled that you are here. On this episode, we're going to be talking about why it's important to talk to an older generation of magicians. Maybe they're really not that old, but they do come from a part of magic that does not exist anymore or is hard to find, and why it's important to sit down, talk to them, session with them, and share secrets, and why it may or may not be important to your magic. I'll also share some books I've been checking out lately, skimming through, and maybe I'll share some hidden gems, but why you should check them out as well. Thank you for being here for another episode of the MO Sessions. I just wanted to take a few moments out of my day, and hopefully you're listening, and thank you for that. I want to talk about an older generation of magicians and magic that may exist, and some of the guys may not even be that old, men and women in magic who are from a generation that's a couple ahead of mine. It is important to experience sitting down with these people. This is why I want to talk about this. I recently joined Dave Williamson's membership, and he was having a discussion with the incredible Mike Caveney, and they were talking about old stories and old things that they experienced together and had worked on together. And myself being a magician, I really sat there and wondered what a conversation between me and Mike Caveney would look like, who is highly informed and very well experienced in our field. So it's interesting to think about what he would have to offer for me, which I know would be a lot. But at the same time, my experience with talking to an older generation of magicians, I absolutely love it. And that's because I'm old school, which is good and bad, right? So when I say old school, I'm not talking about how I was brought up, which is part of, my ecosystem, my world. But I'm talking about magic, old school magic, and why it is important to take it and modernize it just a little bit, not significantly. There's some real hidden gems that I've found in readings, old books that I have and things like that. I've talked about it on the podcast before, but why is it important to you? Why is it important to your magic? I really think it's important to your magic to sit down, and some magicians who listen to my podcast are of an older generation, and there seems to be not a divide, I don't want to say, because it's not a harsh line that's like left and right, but there seems to be an issue of some sort with the younger generations of magic, which I get. I have my own issues with the younger generations of magic. And this isn't a whose side are we on situation or conversation. This is we have something in common. We have magic in common. But the interesting thing is that the older generations of magicians who I've talked to and discussed things with, we're always talking about this, things that are interesting. I talked to a lot of guys about Marlowe, and I talked to a lot of guys about what makes Marlowe great, and man, have you checked out this effect, and I just read this effect in so-and-so. Have you checked this out? Man, that's great. And then we break it up, figure out what other resources have that effect, and break it down. And I go as far as to, if there's moves or sleights or techniques in the effect, I want to know the history, I want to know where it comes from, and that sort of thing. But without talking to these people, I wouldn't, number one, be inspired. Number two, I would have no idea where I would go to discuss this sort of thing with. You have to remember, when I started my journey back into magic, I was a lone ranger. I didn't know anybody. I didn't know any magicians. I had an idea of what my goals were. And the MO Sessions was to document it. Thankfully, because of the MO Sessions, I've been exposed to a few magicians who I can now call my friends who have been kind enough to come on, or I talk to privately, and what have you. It's been an incredible journey talking to younger magicians and older magicians. There's information there that is important for all magicians to share. And I do think it makes your magic better in certain ways. Even a story, even an experience that person had. The fact that there's magicians still around who experienced Del Rey, who experienced Sly Dini, and that generation, like Mike Caveney was talking to Dave Williamson on his Sleight School about Mike Caveney, this 100 Years of Sawing book that he just came out with, was a college essay paper he started in 1971. Was like a good portion of the book, and he did all this research, and he went out and talked to people who saw Blackstone, who worked with Thurston. I could be mixing that up. And I mean, it's just incredible. It's incredible. It's so important to remember that magic is a community, but it needs to be a better community. It needs to be like families sharing stories. And growing up in an Italian and Jewish household, my grandparents told me stories. My aunts and uncles would tell me stories. I'd have to go digging for stories with my family. It's just so important to know our rich texture of history and heritage. I think it's important to keep that alive. I think it's important to pass that on. Whether you're interested in that or not, it's interesting to have that information. Whether it makes you better or not is almost regardless in terms of passing on stories. We're hearing stories now from my generation of magicians that were passed on from an older generation of magicians. We wouldn't know these stories unless we had asked or discussed or it was brought up somehow. But I will say this, piggybacking off of my last episode about sharing secrets, it is so important to understand that some magicians just will not share certain secrets with you. And that's okay. You have much as of a right to share secrets with them as they do with you. And that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. I do believe in earning a secret. I do believe in practicing your magic and getting it to a point of where worthy sounds elitism, right? That's not a good word to use. But I will say, to the point of where a wizard would have an apprentice and say, on to the next lesson. That sort of thing is so important to me. And that's okay. Hidden gems lie within old magic. And I find it amazing that a younger generation, they don't need to, well, the younger generation is completely rewriting history almost. And I think it's really interesting to apply it to magic and say that there are magicians out there who are not going to know who Vernon is. Yes, they're performing sleights that all these card guys created or worked on or dove into. But us as magicians, it is our job to continue that lineage. I understand there's working pros out there that got into the industry because of quote unquote fun and because they wanted to get out there and make some money. And I get that. I respect it. Do I agree with it? It's not for this conversation. But I do also understand that there is a heritage of magic, just like there's a heritage to any sort of culture. It's created. It started. That ball is rolling. You can jump onto it or you can get off at the next stop. I think it's important to young magicians to understand not to be afraid to talk to an older magician. Introduce yourself. Say hello. And if they're an asshole to you, cross it off your list and say never again. We have to remember also that magicians who perform on stage are human beings too. With families maybe, with a life, with bills, with health issues, with happiness, sadness. They're human beings. So when you see a particular character up on stage performing magic, you have to also understand when you approach them on the personal side of things after the show or in private or whatever it may be, they are themselves. And maybe they are not who they seem to be on stage, and that's okay. That's fine. I was fortunate enough to attend an amazing convention that I highly recommend if it goes on next year. I think it goes on every 2 years or 4 years. But it's put on by magician Ken Scott here in Atlanta, Georgia. And it's called Atlanta Harvest of Magic. And my first convention was in 2018. And it was the Penguin Convention. And I'm not ashamed to say that. I just chose not to associate with magicians for a very long time. And I attended this convention, and although we still are in the middle of COVID, I don't know what's going on with COVID. It's whatever. But we're still wearing masks, everyone's vaccinated, and things are still happening. People are still getting it, right? So it was a fairly small gathering, but it was an extremely intimate gathering that was phenomenal. There's a young card magician that I met. Maybe he's young, I don't know. His name is Bernardo Sedlicek. And Michael Ammar was there, and Jeff McBride was there, and Chad Long was there, and all these other magicians were there. All of them, fantastic. I've seen them before. But Bernardo, I have never seen before, and absolutely blew me away with performing real magic. And what was really interesting about his magic was he performed magic, and when he did his lecture afterwards, it was rich with information and history and why and, breaking down the magic. It is so important to have those things and understand them. It's a whole different approach to learning magic, in my opinion. And I was vibing right on the same level with him. Like, of course you're doing that because that's real magic. Of course you're doing this stuff because it just makes sense, when you're presenting magic to an audience, which is baffling to me that a good portion of the people, maybe half of them, just didn't, they got it, but they didn't get it. And if you got it, good for you. But it's amazing to me that some magicians scoffed it off and was like, oh, not my thing. I enjoyed it. I hope if you were there and you experienced it, you know what I'm talking about. It was incredible. I highly recommend checking him out. Bernardo Sedlicek. And I hope one day I can have him come on to the podcast. I didn't have time to talk to him about it there, but it was great. I was just there to enjoy magic. It was less about learning magic, right? We can learn all the magic we want, right? On our own time. This was about being in person and talking and sharing. And I was luckily enough able to see some good friends and talk to some new ones. And it was great to see magic in person. The biggest treat of the whole weekend was seeing Jeff McBride perform and Michael Ammar perform I grew up watching them on World's Greatest Magic, and I've never seen them in person before. The weekend, in terms of a lecture, I've seen them perform in person, but I've never attended a lecture of theirs, and never in a gala show have I seen them perform. So it was really interesting to experience that. It's great. And it's important to keep these things in mind. Our history, our heritage, where this industry started from, and like where it's going, and why it's important to talk to and share with an older generation of magicians, because we're the ones carrying the mantle, the torch, whatever you want to call it. Not in a formal way, in a metaphorical way, but literally we are carrying on. And Mike Caveney talks about this in his interview with Dave Williamson, which I recommend. I'll put the link below. I'm not sponsored by any of these guys to talk about this stuff. I just think it's important to share. And this is what I do. And that's what Mike Caveney was kind of talking about as well, is that they went to Abbott's and him and Williamson loved the atmosphere and the camaraderie and that whole environment, because it was the old guys and the young guys linking together and having a good time and talking and sharing and being a community, being a family. And I thought that was incredible. I thought it was incredible. You know me in the old school. I mean, it's one of those things where it's like, it's just so important to kind of understand that it is our responsibility to keep this going. And me being where I am in life, I think it's really interesting to sit here and think about that sort of thing. Enough about that. Let's talk about some events that I think are important for you to check out. Way of the Wizards 4, Paul V. Hill, Jared Koff, Mike Pashota. It's going to be fantastic. The guest of honor this time is this is the fourth one they've put on. It's a virtual seminar. It's Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. And it's this Friday and Saturday and Sunday, the 15th, 16th, and 17th. And you can go over to Paul V. Hill's, or go to thewayofthewizard.com and sign up through there. Guest of honor is Jason England. Jeff McBride will be there. Benjamin Earl, John Wilson, and I'm missing someone, but I can't think of it off the top of my head. It is on the website. Dave Williamson's membership, incredible. Yesterday I spent all day catching up on these interviews he does with his friends and other magicians and things like that. It's incredible. It's amazing. He has his boot camp and all of this stuff, on card stuff. It's great. I was originally part of Studio 52's, not membership they had going on, but like their, whatever, the seminars and the books and all that other stuff. And it's very similar to that, but it's kind of taking it to another notch. It's kind of bringing it down to like an old school mellow sort of feel. It's incredible. On top of that, Magic Inc. announced, finally, after I think they said 13 years, that the third Marlowe book out of the trilogy, which would be a Revolutionary Card Technique and, damn, I can't think of the other one. Cardurally Yours, there we go. The third book is finally coming out in 2022. I am excited. I can't wait to see it. I hope you enjoy it too. Thank you for being here for another episode, a little tidbit for your day. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you on the next episode. We did it. We made it to the end of the podcast. Your attention means the world to me. Thank you for sticking it out the whole episode. I hope you learned something from this episode. If you would like to learn more or donate to our podcast, head over to our Patreon, where you can find some magic education, essays, thoughts of mine, and other shared content. I have a growing Instagram where you can correspond with me, as well as a growing Twitter where we can host live events. The Patreon I work really hard on to give you a good amount of content, enough to share and learn without overloading you with magic, so you can become a better magician. Continue down the rabbit hole and do better magic. And remember to leave magic better than you found it.